Hello everybody. I'm trying to do a lecture for YouTube that you can all see, and I'm not really sure what's going on here. I don't know if you can see me or not. My son set it up for me, so it should be okay, and I've got a series of introductory lectures which I want to work on, and the first one I want to do is art and architecture through the ages from prehistory to the classical period, but we won't make it to the classical period today. I shall do another one. I shall do loads more and hopefully send them to you. So let's begin. We're going to start with prehistory, and we're going to start with cave painting, and the slide that we've got up there is, as it says, from the cave at Lascaux. There are lots of other caves, particularly in France and in Spain, but in many other places such as Australia and so on. And the characteristics of this kind of painting on the walls of the insides of caves are they're very figurative artworks. They are there to represent exactly what the people see. I'm thinking about the shape of the horns here on this bull, and the fact that the way they curve around makes an elliptical shape. This is very fine observation. You can see around the eyes the markings on the bull's hide, and you can see the shape of its mouth and so on. So all of this is very, very figurative. It's exactly what the people would see at the time. These lines, we don't really know what they are, but they might well be arrows that are sticking in, and we don't know why these were painted. Obviously in 12,000 BC. This is a prehistoric period, which means there is no writing and they can't tell us what they were thinking. What's very significant is the fact that the images are laid one over another. So if you look at this one here, behind, it's not actually behind, it's just that one is drawn over another. There are some other ones down here and some up here in the background, and that means that these particular images were not precious as images. There has to be another reason as to why they were done. So there's got to be something magical about it, something connected with some kind of faith about it, and there's got to be something probably temporary about the power that these images have. The caves would be revisited year in, year out by nomadic wandering tribes who were hunter-gatherers, and so maybe each year or every couple of years or whatever, they would come and redraw images over the tops of the old ones, and possibly that's about renewing the life force that's there. Most of these images are of animals. There are one or two pictures of human beings, and they are very abstract. They don't look like human beings much. They're just little pin figures. It's the animals that are drawn in all their complexity. And the materials used are basically found materials around. There's burnt stuff, which is bones sometimes that are burnt, sometimes wood like charcoal, and there are pigments from the earth. There are brown clays of various sorts, yellow ochre, red ochre, and those sorts of clays that are used. And sometimes there are handprints, and sometimes the clay has been chewed up in someone's mouth with water and then blown out over a hand so that the hands are in silhouette on the insides of the caves, and that might act like a signature. And we don't really know why these were done or who did them, but it's possible that it was a shaman-like person that would go down into the deep caves. These caves are not just for resting in and living in. These caves are too deep for that, and they are possibly quite frightening places to go. They would have had to have illumination with burning things, torches, that kind of thing, to do it. And maybe it was a shaman that would go down there, and maybe he or she was a shaman because they had this ability to capture in a drawing technique what the living creature looked like. It's probably about fertility, and the fertility of animals in particular would give you meat and would get you through hard times. So that's probably why all the animals are shown. So if I go on to the next slide, this is even older, and it's called the Venus of Willendorf because of where it was found, and it's in the Natural History Museum in Vienna, which is very annoying because if you want to see the art, you go to the art gallery in Vienna, and if you want to see this little Venus of Willendorf, she's in the Natural History Museum, which you have to pay separately for, so it's a little bit annoying, but she's a very beautiful piece of artwork. She's very tiny. She fits in the palm of a hand. There are replicas of her, so you can see sometimes if you Google it, you can see people holding a little replica of it in the palm of their hand. She's a fertility figure, and probably portable. That's probably why she's very small. The cave art, the cave paintings were not portable, obviously, but a lot of prehistoric art was. It could be like a good luck charm and carried around with you. She's got this amazing hairdo. We don't know if it's a hairdo. It might be a woolly hat for all we know. And it's covering most of her head, and she doesn't have any facial features. You can just see that she's got tiny arms over her breasts there. And she's absolutely full-bodied, very, very fat figure. And this is typical of this kind of maternity figure, I suppose. These goddesses, they're about fertility and about producing children, and one assumes that being that weight was a good thing in those days because food would be hard to come by. She's got little arms, therefore, over her breast. She's got these little legs that get smaller towards the feet. Most other fertility goddesses of this type, they tend to call them Venuses, they don't have feet, and she wouldn't have had originally either. She's not made to stand. She's made to just rest in the palm of a hand. So mostly then figurative art, mostly art that looks like what you want to represent. So the animals look like real animals, the fertility goddesses, they look like real women in that they have large breasts and large hips and genitalia. So moving on to the next slide, we're now much later. We're now in 1400 BC, and this is a tomb painting, and I think I'd like to talk about the style of this because the style is very different from the paintings of the animals. The animals are painted in outline, not always filled in, sometimes filled in with some colour, but there's a realism about them which is also present here. The things in the Egyptian paintings look like what they are meant to represent, but they are made in a very diagrammatic way, and you can see that because here, if you look at this figure's eye just there, you can see right behind it the hieroglyph for an eye, and the hieroglyph, the character, if you like, the letter or the word, is identical to the way that the eye is drawn on the figure itself. This means that now these Egyptians are thinking in terms of their writing and their image as performing the same function. They are telling you something, and it's not about the reality of what an eye actually looks like. So long as it's recognizable, that's what counts, and it will take on various meanings in the hieroglyphs. So we have our figure standing here, and it's typical of Egyptian art in that it is drawn in outline. You can see the outlines there, and it's coloured in with flat colouring, flat diagrammatic colouring. And we have our prince standing on a barge, and he's going hunting. This is a hunting stick, and he's caught a group of birds, three birds in his hand, and he has down here a hunting cat with its tail hanging down here, and a bird behind its tail. It's holding a bird with its claws, another bird with its front claws, and it's got this bird's wing in its mouth. So this is a very important cat for this prince. It's possibly a favourite pet. It's a hunting cat. So the Egyptian prince is going on his barge. He's hunting. He's got fish in the water, and you can see exactly what the fish look like. And they're all done kind of side on so that we can see them properly. There's a plant here that looks rather like a lotus. And we have, in all the spaces, more wildlife. We've got all the birds that all look like the different birds that they're meant to be. We've got the butterflies here, and the butterflies conveniently fill in the spaces. They are occupying the negative spaces in between the other solid objects, and they're matching shapes, so you get this kind of wedge-like shape of this ornament that he's wearing, this papyrus shape, and it kind of folds itself around where the butterfly is. And the Egyptians are very conscious of positive and negative spaces. They like to fill the gaps with a row of writing or a bit of a scarf hanging down, and it makes their artwork very sensitive, very beautiful. So they drew in outline and they filled in with flat colour. The colour of the male figures is usually slightly warmer, more red brick colour than it is for the female figures. They tend to be less reddish, I suppose. They tend to go more towards a fawn brown colour. And we have no light and shade, only outlines to show the way the figure is positioned. And with Egyptian art, nearly always the head is seen in profile. In Egyptian painting, the head is seen in profile, so we can see the nose and the mouth in profile, but the eye is seen from the front. And then we have the shoulders, which are seen front on. And and that shows you how the arms articulate onto the shoulders. And then as we come down, we see the twist in the torso, so that the front of the shoulders converts into the side of the area of the buttocks and down into the leg. And we have one leg in front of the other. This is quite typical. And we have, for the feet, the big toe always comes forward, so you can see the toenail at the bottom there on each big toe. So in fact it looks as if he's got two right feet on there. There would, or nearly always is in the tombs, a matching version of this across to the right somewhere, or across to the left, the other way around, so that the two figures would face each other, or they would face away from each other, and they would be very similar, almost mirror images of each other. Size-wise, the Egyptians did not use scale to show distance. They always showed the most important thing as the biggest thing in the picture, and things moved down in size accordingly. So our prince is the largest figure here. His queen, who might also be his sister behind him, is the next in scale. And this person here could be a child, because that hairstyle there, where with part of the head shaved and the hair hanging over to one side, was often used for depicting children, but also it might be a concubine, and she sat between his legs, holding onto his one leg with her hand, and she's much smaller than the other two figures, so she is actually less important. If you look at the gorgeous negative shapes that we've got here, like that one under her arm, it matches the shape of the butterflies here and the shapes of the papyrus, and you see all these shapes are kind of echoed through the picture. It's a magnificent picture, and it has huge amounts of decoration in it. You can see lines of the folds of clothing, the patterning of his necklace, the beautiful regular papyrus that we've got there, and even the feathers on the bird's wings, and shading on the bird there so that it gets lighter across the front, but we don't get any shading on the figures at all. They are very, very two-dimensional. and here we have a wall painting, and I've put this on to show you that mostly what was painted on the tombs, on the inside of the tombs, are things that the king or the pharaoh, the prince, wants to take to the afterlife with him. And the previous one showed that prince, he really liked hunting, and he liked all the different flora and fauna that there was around him. In this picture, you can see that this is made for somebody who wants his wine in the afterlife. We have the people here picking the bunches of grapes. We have the figures over here holding on to straps above and treading the grapes. And then here we have a figure collecting the grape juice, and above 4 vases, 4 pots that you put the grape juice into. These are called amphora when they're that shape with a narrow neck and wide shoulders. They are 4 amphorae there, and they got down to a point. This was so that they could be dug into the sand to keep the contents cool, or they would wrap a piece of rope around the bottom so that you could stand the vase up. So these are done in the same manner as the previous one, but these are not princes, obviously, they're workers. If you look at the men treading the grapes, you can see that there are 3 sets of eyes there. So there are 3 figures there, one in the background, one in the foreground, and the one in the middle is lighter skinned so that we can see the dark, the light, and the dark, and that shows the depth. There is no difference in scale of the figures. They are identical in scale, even though they're one behind the other. And on the right hand side we have 2 figures. The back one is lighter than the front one, and you can see the 2 sets of eyes there. Over on the right hand side, in a similar pose to the previous image that we looked at, we have 2 grape pickers with their large eyes seen from the front, pointing towards us, and they're given personalities. These people are given personalities. The pharaohs generally are not. The pharaohs are treated with great respect, and they have to stay absolutely kind of true to being a perfect prince. But these figures don't have to be, and you can see the way this is painted, the difficulty that the artist has had in articulating the arm onto the shoulder there with this man who's working and carrying grapes. So we've got this kind of strange roundness there, but also this man is older and he's got a belly, and this man is slimmer and hasn't. And we get these little differences coming in. You can see the shape of this man's torso here. These little differences coming in when it's not a pharaoh who is being depicted. When it's servants or workers who are being depicted, or slaves, they experiment and they do them in a slightly different way, and they give them character and in various different ways. And you can see that wigs were worn at this time and would probably have been a status symbol, so that these 2 men here with their blonde hair, this one looks like Tintin with his quiff, their hair wouldn't really be like that. That would be some kind of a wig made out of something else. So now we move on to Egyptian sculpture. And this is a sculpture of a pharaoh. This is Tutmosis III. The date is up there, 1450 BC. And this shows you the kind of, what can I say, regimented form of the sculptures of the pharaohs. It is perfect. It is beautifully smooth and rounded across the torso and across the arms. The face is perfectly beautiful, according to the Egyptian manner, with the eyes looking straight forward, a soft smile on the face. He has the Egyptian pharaoh's hat, and he has the Egyptian pharaoh's false beard. Even the female pharaoh had the false beard. It would be attached with string round the ears and fits onto the front of the face there, and it shows power and strength and masculinity, whether it was on the one female pharaoh or whether it was on the the male ones. We have the beautiful decoration of the folds, the pleats of his clothing, and he was standing with one leg forward and one leg back, and that's all broken off at the bottom there, so he's fixed onto a stand, and his hands come down by his sides and they're holding batons. That's holding a baton. This one's broken, which are a symbol of power. So one leg coming forward, the other leg going backwards, should logically make the hips go at a different angle, but with these depictions of pharaohs, they don't. They're absolutely four square. The hips don't alter the angle even though one leg is standing forward. There is a slight sense of movement, but the overall appearance is one of absolute stationary being, an absolutely static image, which is really important because the pharaoh was supposed to last forever. They were mummified, and their bodies, it hoped, would last forever. But they go on to be gods. They're everlasting people, everlasting beings. And the moment you start to show the real living nature of people, the slight imperfections, the movements or whatever, you introduce the concept of time. And what we want to have with these pharaohs is the concept of timelessness. So we have a four square image that doesn't appear to move. It's absolutely static. And to reinforce that, we have the fact that the sculpture isn't carved through in between the arm and the torso. That space there is just left and it's not cut through, so there isn't that essence of movement or life about the sculpture. It's absolutely perfectly timeless and beautiful. To contrast with it, we have a depiction here, a sculptural depiction, stone carving again, of a figure who is not a pharaoh. He was an advisor to the king, and he's being depicted as a scribe. We don't actually have the piercing through between his arm and torso either, although you do on some depictions of scribes. But what we do have is a face that isn't quite like the one of the previous pharaoh. That has a perfect face, a perfect smile, eyes beautifully staring forward. This one, it's a real person. You can sense it's a real person. The shape of the eyes, the shape of the ears is different. If you look at the pharaoh, his ears are almost sticking out so that we can see the ears properly from the front. It's designed to be seen just from the front, this sculpture. This one is much more living. It's designed to be seen more in the round, and the face is a real face. The man is still wearing a wig because they wore wigs to show their authority. He doesn't have a beard at all, but what he has got is an action. He's holding a pen to write. He's holding a block to hold down a scroll, and he looks as if he's made out of flesh. He's got these creases across his torso, like a real human being might, and he's sitting cross-legged, and across his lap is the tight clothing, the tight kilt that they wore, which would have a piece of scroll, a piece of papyrus scroll on top, and the writing underneath here, the hieroglyphs would say who he was and what his rank was, etc., etc. So a big difference between the pharaoh and the advisor who is portrayed as a scribe. This one is what we call an Egyptian block sculpture, and this is to look even more timeless than the previous ones. It is absolutely a square block of stone. It's carved in such a manner that it looks like it's the very kind of rock from which it was made. It has no movement at all. It's absolutely rock solid. It has a head at the top. It has two heads because it's got the little princess there in front of in front of the figure here with the wig on, and all round it, all across the front, all across the sides, across the back, would be the hieroglyphs that would tell you the name and rank of the people. Their whole parentage would be written down there, and that is really important because it's that hereditary line that gives them the power, and gives them not just the power in this life, but the power in the next life of becoming a god or a goddess. So here we have a relief, and it's painted. It's a sculptural relief. It's very shallow relief. So if you look at these, I don't know what they are, cows, oxen, I suppose, with their large horns, they are standing ever so slightly proud of the background, and they're carved beautifully to give you the sense of the slight folds in the hide, and they're one after the other in a row. They don't get smaller as they get into the background, and the background is flat, and the figures stand out against it. We'll look at something slightly different in a minute, and these are just delightful. They are really very interesting in the way that they are, the way that the image is planned. And some of it looks very realistic, like this pointing figure. Looks very, very figurative indeed. Other parts of this image look really abstract, and if you look at the water, it zigzags vertically down like ripples on the surface of the water, but it's almost the way a child might paint water. It's like a flat fabric rather than actual figurative water with reflections on it. It's a very clever way of denoting water, and it allows these creatures underneath to be seen. I'm trying to remember what they are because they don't actually look like anything particular. I'm not sure if they're crocodiles or hippopotami, but we get both in these pictures. You'll have to have a closer look yourselves and see what you think. These figures are on the boat and they are hunting. The front figure is pointing. I don't think he's actually meant to be pointing at what they're hunting. I think that is a gesture of safety. It keeps evil at bay. So it's a way of making sure that you manage to control what you're going after. I don't know if they're hunting. I suspect they're herding, but it's a common sign to keep evil away. We've got the man who's rowing. There's his oar. And we've got a man at the back, I don't know, poling it along, and kneeling. And in the register above, because this is an image in two registers, the Egyptians painted in registers, often lots of different layers from top to bottom. We see these wonderful depictions of cattle with their horns up, and the way their horns are shown here, very similar to the ones that were in the prehistoric cave painting. They kind of capture the shape of the ellipse there. This cow has its tail up in the air and it's giving birth. There's a little cowlet coming out in the back there, and this man is here ready to catch it, and there's somebody here pointing again, whether he's actually sort of just indicating to us what's happening, because it's not absolutely clear. I don't know. And a figure here bending over with a belly, looking quite realistic, doing some work, and another calf here. A calf at the top in amongst the hieroglyphs. You can see amongst the hieroglyphs is an owl, a falcon, various other, a foot with a leg, various other shapes there which are done in outline almost, and very stylized. This is the other way that the Egyptians did relief, where the background is actually on the front plane, and they cut into whatever it is, the limestone or whatever. They cut into it so that you get a strong shadow here. That's often done on the outsides actually of buildings, so that it catches the sun and you can see the strong shadow, and see the outlines very clearly because of that. And then within those outlines the shape of the arm is rounded and quite full, and the shape of the torso here, we get the folds, the pleats of his kilt, and his pharaoh's hat, his Egyptian pharaoh's hat, and this would have been coloured as well at one time. You can see traces of the dark ochre colour that was on it. And there, just very quickly and very briefly, is another one, a slightly cruder version here, not by such a competent artist, where we see these figures herding cattle and taking this bull by the lead and moving it forward, and this one hitting it with a stick to move it on, and you can see them with the same technique of doing a two-dimensional image of a person, with the head from the side, the eye from the front, the shoulders from the front, the hips from the side, and two kind of front feet, two right feet going forward, and the shape of the kilt sticking out like that, casting that quite big shadow there. And in this one, the relief is forward and the background is behind. The previous one, if we just revisit it, the background is sitting forward, and then they can round off the figures within. And finally, I'd like to talk about the mummy portraits. We're a lot later now. We're 24 AD, so we're past the year dot, and the Greeks invaded Egypt, and Egypt became a Greek colony. And then the Romans did the same. They invaded Greece and Egypt became a Roman colony. And by that time, things have changed. And when we get to look at Roman art, which we will do, it will become apparent that they are focused on the realism of faces, and that Roman element carries through onto the mummy portraits. So they no longer look like pharaohs. These are just normal upper class people, and they are possibly having these portraits done at the age of about 30, so that they can stand on a table and be looked at by people, and that eventually they would be put on the front of the mummy case to show a likeness of the person inside. And they are absolutely realistic. They're typically Roman in the way that they are shaded, so there is amazing light and shade. If you look at the light across the cheekbones there and there, the little bit of light on the end of her nose, and on above the top lip, you can see the light down the neck that makes it shaded like a cylinder. This is absolutely beautiful. The recognition of the dark areas, the light areas, there's reflected light down that side of her face. So it's very well observed, and it's painted with an acute three-dimensional realism. There's reflected light under her chin as well there, if you have a look at it. This one is painted in tempera, which means that the pigment is put into an egg yolk usually, and it means that the brushstrokes will dry quite quickly, so there are tiny little visible brushstrokes everywhere. Now, the fact of doing a likeness was really important, and obviously not so earlier on in the Egyptian period. Her eyes are different sizes and slightly different shapes. They are looked at individually, so the realism comes forward. The fact that she has perhaps something wrong with her nose there, maybe has had something happen to it, an accident or a disease or something, and that isn't made perfect. It is this lady herself. We actually know who she was, and we know that she and her two daughters were buried together, so it may be some disease that saw them off. Very, very beautiful painting. She is wearing all her best jewellery. She's got wonderful pearl earrings. And if you look at this one, it's light against the darkness of the background. When you come over to this side, it's light against a lighter background, so that this cheek can come forward with that dark line, and it sets her in her space brilliantly well. She's very three-dimensional, solid figure. She's wearing her best gold necklace. She's had her hair done for the occasion with these little swirls of hair across her forehead. And she's really proud, I think, of her individuality. She's wearing her best dress with the purple stripes down, a sign of almost imperial majesty. And she's wanted to look as perfect as possible. And I want to go and have a look at some other mummy portraits just before I finish. So I'm going to try and get up Google here. What am I doing? Gregory, I might need help here. Just to get this going.
Looking at the recording.
What's...
That's the browser there.
Where?
What are you trying to do?
I'm trying to get up one of my...
That's the recording software.
Oh, is it?
That's the image.
Oh, I'm on... Sorry, I'm on the wrong bit.
Pull this out. Just start from a logical point.
Okay, so I want to look at some of these other Egyptian portraits that are online. Just Google Egyptian mummy portraits and you'll get lots of them up and lots of articles about them as well that are very, very interesting. So I thought we'd just have a little look at some that are online. Many of them are from Fayum, and this set that we're looking at now on Google are. Look at that. That is almost Victorian, or even maybe almost Impressionist. It's beautifully painted. The eyes are enlarged. We get the moisture around the eyes, the beauty of the light and shadow on the lips. She's made to look really, really beautiful. And it appears very modern to our eyes now. And if I just scroll down past all of these to get to the other ones that I want to show you, there is another. This woman, it's called The Woman in a Blue Cape, and it's only a fragment, so we haven't got the whole thing. She's in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and she is not painted in egg tempera. She's painted in encaustic, which is a wax-based paint. You put your pigments into hot wax and kind of plaster it on, and hence you can see all the thickness of the pigments here, and you can see that this almost impressionist technique has come from the materials used. You can see how realistic she is at the same time, and there are very many portraits like these of both women and men, all looking very realistic. He also has something wrong with his nose, and that's beautiful. Look at the largeness of the eyes, the slight moustache on the top lip, the light and shade on it. Very, very beautiful young man. And that one was in the Pushkin Museum. All of these other things, you can read this article, you can see what it is and catch it online. This one in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, this young boy with his beautiful face and his big eyes looking out at us. Not quite so beautiful, older man, but so realistic in the way that the portrayal is. And if you compare that one with that one, you can see that that is very realistic. The eyes are quite small and quite close together, the shape of his face. He wants to be who he is. He wants to, look at the way these ears are painted. They're absolutely beautiful, that against the background there. And he wants to be exactly the person he is, whereas I think this young lady wants to be a dreamily beautiful young lady, and her eyes are larger, and she's got the most fantastic earrings on. And if I just go to here, here's a whole group of other ones that you can see. This is on Pinterest, and there are some really original, real people staring out at us from these mummy portraits. Tremendous bits of work. So as I just scroll through these lovely images, and a lot of them, and I hope that you will look them up because they're so well painted, and so unique to each individual person. So on that note, I will finish. So goodbye everybody, and tune in for the next one.